What if Trump's authentic chaos is no longer spontaneous at all, but a machine learning loop of familiar tics, so predictable it forces us to ask whether presence itself can be faked by consistency? What follows is not guesswork, nor is it mere rhetoric. It is the result of a structured pattern recognition process, assisted by AI, designed to test whether the signals we observe around the presidency align with the behavior of a living, deliberating figure, or with the signs of synthetic replacement. By walking through each of these tests, we can see whether the observed presidency sustains itself under the weight of logical consistency, or whether it begins to unravel, flashing signs of fabrication, absence, or automation. The advantage of this approach is that it resists both paranoia and credulity. It does not assume fakery, nor does it assume authenticity. It simply measures whether the signals converge or diverge. In the end, we are left with a question that demands to be asked, even if we'd prefer not to. Is it possible the president is not entirely real? Not metaphorically, not politically. We mean in the most literal technical sense, composited, synthesized, filtered, and presented through a system of mediation so airtight it may now function without the man himself. Whether this amounts to a full digital double or simply a performance so curated it ceases to behave like human presence, the result is the same. What we're seeing no longer tracks with how reality behaves. This isn't about one strange clip or one awkward press event. The signs are cumulative, unnatural rhythm in speech and gesture, a conspicuous absence of spontaneous interaction, media appearances that look and feel increasingly pre-rendered. When you add to that a policy record that seems legally incoherent and politically suicidal, and all of it delivered with the polish of a Netflix drop, you begin to wonder not just who is behind it, but what. In what follows, we'll lay out the full case, the behavioral irregularities, the procedural sleight of hand, the implausibility of the policies themselves, and we'll leave you with the central logic of reversion, a principle by which the unreality of the outputs throws the reality of the input into doubt. We are not here to promote a theory. We are here to describe a pattern. You decide what explains it best. But consider this. If you had to fake a presidency, wouldn't it look exactly like this? To begin making sense of the absurd, we start with the obvious. The president appears constantly. His face is on every screen, his voice echoes through every news cycle, his presence looms over every policy rollout and cultural moment. If there's one thing no one would think to question, it's whether Donald Trump is visible. But visibility is not the same as presence. Because once you begin to examine his behavior, not the content of what he says, but how it operates, you notice something strange. Donald Trump always behaves exactly like Donald Trump. Word for word, beat for beat, mannerism for mannerism. A perfect storm of interruptions, tangents, self-congratulations, tangles of grievance and sales pitch that never drift into true spontaneity. Every outburst lands just where it's supposed to. Every performance, no matter how unhinged, feels eerily on brand. And the more you watch, the more it stops feeling real. The hand gestures are unchanged. The cadence is locked. The snorts, the double point, the slow lean toward the microphone for dramatic effect. They all appear in sequence like muscle memory performed for a studio audience. There are no surprises, no unscheduled emotional registers, no stumbles into sincerity, confusion, hesitation, or self-doubt. Not once does the president seem to lose control of himself, only of others. In short, it's always Trump, never just a man. Consider how unprecedented that is. No figure in political history has ever performed their own persona with such relentless continuity. Not Reagan, not Nixon, not even Trump 1.0. There were always cracks, always moments of human stutter. But now, every single public appearance behaves like a perfect output of the Trump engine. He insults reporters, but never quite the wrong ones. He shouts about crime, but never forgets to plug the Trump coin. He launches into bizarre tangents about dishwashers, sharks, boats, blood, yes, the usual Trump things. But somehow, they never derail the performance. They are the performance. And they arrive with the rhythm of recurring characters in a sitcom that no longer needs writers. Even his improvisations now seem pre-baked. A new nickname, a strange anecdote, a claim so absurd it should be a blooper, and yet it lands like clockwork. Crowd reacts, headlines follow, threads begin. You've seen this episode before. That is the essence of the behavioral case. It's not that Trump is malfunctioning, it's that he's operating too reliably within the boundaries of his own madness. Not because he's disciplined, not because he's improved, but because his behavior has been templated, deployed, replayed, like an algorithm trained on itself until the only thing left is brand performance. And we ask again, is this still a man behaving in public? Or are we watching a character generated at scale, piped into every medium, tuned to elicit the same sequence of reactions over and over again? If the president were truly governing in the traditional sense, present at the helm, engaged in decision-making, accountable to process, we would expect to see conflict but also continuity. Arguments among aides, compromises hammered out, policies that carry the fingerprints of deliberation. Instead, what we see is chaos without process, endless leaks, sudden firings, aides contradicting each other on camera. Yet none of it ever adds up to a visible path from problem to policy. Decisions do not emerge from a discernible chain of reasoning. They erupt. One day an executive order materializes, the next day it's walked back, then re-announced in slightly altered form. Aides scramble to retrofit explanations. Allies improvise rationalizations. Courts are left to guess what the rule even means. The policies are not built, they are declared, crafted for immediate media impact, detached from implementation, and often abandoned before they can take root. This is not governance in the deliberative sense. It is procedural theater, chaos in the front of house, emptiness in the back. The firings, the reversals, the leaks, they create the illusion of internal struggle. But what's missing is the connective tissue, the deliberation that would turn turmoil into actual decision-making. What remains instead is content. Executive orders, proclamations, and declarations released like episodes, designed to dominate a news cycle, but leaving no trace of governing process behind them. Take the recent maritime drug war videos, military sinkings of alleged smuggling vessels. Each clip came straight from the White House. Tight cuts, bold font overlays, high drama music cues. No Pentagon context, no prior briefing, no independent verification. No state or DoD official explaining objectives, risk, or strategy. Just spectacle, neatly wrapped. Real military's telegraph doctrine. This looked like highlight reels from a military video game. Then there was the Erdogan summit. A foreign head of state visit typically moves through layers of diplomacy, leaks from embassies, slow confirmation. But on September 25th, Erdogan simply appeared, greeted at the White House, photographed at the podium, without the usual fog of buildup. No advance press chatter, no public State Department groundwork, no months-long negotiation trail. It felt less like diplomacy and more like a cameo appearance summoned by script. Or take the Antifa terrorist designation. Normally, labeling a domestic group as a terrorist entity would trigger legal debates, intelligence briefings, agency memos, something. Instead, Trump just said it. No formal process, no paper trail, no rollout of supporting material. It wasn't a decision emerging from the machinery of state. It was a narrative device, delivered like a twist in the plot. As of today, they're terrorists. Roll credits. This is what procedural unreality looks like. Not chaos, but absence of causality. No before, no after, just the appearance of presidential action, mid-sequence, like a YouTube recap of an event we never saw begin. Even the White House media pipeline reflects this. Gone are the chaotic leaks and staff infighting we associate with previous Trumpian episodes. Now everything flows outward in pristine video packages. Executive orders drop via live stream, complete with crisp edits and graphics, but rarely followed by quanda, congressional rebuttal, or intra-party negotiation. It's not a presidency, it's a studio feed. Most revealing is what we don't see. Persuasion. In a functioning administration, big decisions trigger visible internal conflict. Think Reagan twisting GOP arms on budgets, Think Obama wrangling Democrats on healthcare. But today, when major announcements land on immigration, foreign policy, security, no one is caught pushing back, no senators storming out of meetings, no staffers claiming they influence the outcome, no human tension, just roll out, then scramble. Which raises the central question, where is the process? Where are the drafts, the negotiations, the strategic debates? Because this isn't what governance looks like. It's what governance as content looks like. Policy as broadcast. The illusion of statecraft without the evidence of a statecrafting body. This is not how law works. It is how content drops. So is this simply a tightly run communications operation? Or are we witnessing something else entirely? A presidency that exists primarily for the camera, operating like a distribution platform for pre-rendered outcomes. By the time we reach the policy layer, the question isn't whether the president is coherent. The question is whether the presidency as a whole still operates with a single mind. Because what we are seeing consistently across domains is not simply contradiction. It is split personality, policies that appear not just out of sync, but as if authored by different entities entirely, without deliberation, without reconciliation, without memory of the last output. Take immigration. One track rolls out the gold card and proposed platinum card, offering fast-track residency to wealthy donors or corporate-sponsored applicants. The message is clear. If you have capital, you can buy access. But at the same time, another track imposes a $100,000 annual fee on H-1B visas, suspends entire visa categories, and accelerates enforcement. So we are simultaneously inviting the rich in and locking out the skilled. That's not policy, that's tiered absurdity. But it's not just immigration. The incoherence stretches across foreign policy, security, trade, and diplomacy, anywhere real decision-making is supposed to occur. At a recent Oval Office meeting, Trump was asked whether he aligned more with Russia or Ukraine. His answer? I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America, and for the good of the world, I'm aligned with the world. It's the kind of answer that reads less like strategy and more like semantic diffusion, a refusal to hold a position at the very moment one is needed. Allies don't negotiate with abstraction. They negotiate with commitments. Meanwhile, in real-world strategy, the contradictions pile up. Trump is sending arms to Ukraine through joint NATO mechanisms, while simultaneously threatening to withhold US sanctions on Russia unless European countries halt their own Russian oil imports. One hand assists the defense of Ukraine, the other hand weakens it unless unrelated energy demands are met. This is not conditional leverage, it's cross-threaded foreign policy, a system issuing threats and aid in the same breath on opposite vectors. This continues in domestic security. The administration announced it would designate Antifa as a major terrorist organization. Not just a soundbite, an official posture. That stance was swiftly mirrored by Hungary, one of Trump's increasingly vocal allies abroad. But domestically, the designation lacks a legal framework. Antifa isn't a group with centralized leadership or tactics. Internationally, the move alienates allies who view protest freedoms as essential. So which is it, a legitimate security concern or a symbolic lever, a real posture or a script being coordinated across geopolitical actors? The pattern holds in Latin America. Trump orders military strikes on Venezuelan drug cartel vessels in international waters, then within the same month, decertifies Colombia, a longtime ally, as uncooperative in the drug war, but then waives the sanctions. So Venezuela is treated as an enemy. Colombia as both enemy and ally, and no clear doctrine governs either. Ally and adversary status is doled out episodically, not strategically. Even on trade, clarity collapses. Trump declares that new tariff negotiations with China are underway, but China denies it. Exemptions are issued on key imports without a pattern. Messaging diverges. The U.S. talks tough, but the implementation is scattered. Are we escalating or de-escalating? Neither side knows because no one is managing the thread. This is not realpolitik. This is narrative schizophrenia. One hand tweets, the other signs. One hand threatens, the other winks. One hand designates, the other deletes. And what holds across these contradictions is not strategy. It is the absence of deliberation. No visible cost-benefit analysis, no political persuasion, no evidence of trade-offs discussed and resolved. Just outputs, dropped into the feed, uncoordinated, uncorrected, unexplained. Which leaves us to ask, who is reconciling these contradictions? Because the answers can't be found in process. The outputs contradict. The priorities collide. And no one, from allies to agencies to citizens, seems able to trace them back to a single, consistent source of thought. Are we witnessing a strategic balancing act? Or are we watching an unstable AI flickering between incompatible policy modules, issuing proclamations like a malfunctioning feed with no internal logic to bind them? At a certain point, the behavior, the process, and the policy no longer merely challenge the credibility of a presidency. They challenge its reality. We call this reversion, the logical condition where the unreality of the outputs becomes so overwhelming, so structurally unsupportable that it forces us to invert our assumptions about the input. We stop asking, "What is he doing?" and begin asking, "Is there still aha doing it?" This is not rhetorical, it is deductive. If the behavior collapses, if the same gestures, catchphrases, and disruptions are looped so perfectly that they no longer express spontaneity but simulate it, then the presence collapses. If the policies contradict so violently, if the government simultaneously sells immigrant access to billionaires while criminalizing those fleeing war or persecution, if it sends arms to Ukraine while protecting Russian oil interests, if it punishes and pardons Colombia in the same breath, then the behavioral logic is already broken. And if a figure can convincingly perform this role, deliver conflicting lines, hold opposite stances, operate as both hawk and dove, as populist and plutocrat, with no tether to process or coherence, then we have to ask, what exactly is the requirement for that figure to be real? Because now we arrive at the final test. Could a simulation do this job? If the primary task of the president is to announce predetermined outcomes, to inhabit a character designed for constant repetition, to never show deliberation, to issue policies that do not cohere and cannot survive scrutiny, then the answer is yes. A simulation could do that. In fact, a simulation might do it better. Reversion logic tells us that belief in authorship must be proportionate to the integrity of the outputs. And when the outputs resemble procedural theater, policy as performance, contradiction with no visible compromise, then the default assumption must shift. Not because we've found a glitch in the video, not because a lip didn't sync, but because the behavior of the system is functionally indistinguishable from an automated deployment. And if the product can be convincingly attributed to a synthetic entity, then we must entertain the possibility that no living person made the decision. The outputs are unreal. The man is no longer credible as their source. We don't need proof of a fake. We need proof of authorship. And it isn't there. This is not conspiracy thinking. This is the last remaining rational conclusion in the face of procedural incoherence and policy unreality. The president is still speaking, but the words no longer appear to come from a person, only from a pipeline. And the more we search for causality, for signs of persuasion, for negotiation, for moments of human conflict, the more we are forced to conclude that there was no decision made, only something that appeared to follow from one. This is the horror of reversion. That even if the man exists, even if he stands there blinking, sweating, grinning, shouting, the logic has already broken. We have reached the point where even a real person would be indistinguishable from a post-production artifact, acting out policies he neither conceived nor understands. So again, we ask not, is he fake? But rather, does it still matter if he's real? Because at this point, what we're watching is not governance. And when the system begins to behave this way, when contradiction becomes the norm, when agency disappears, when the leader appears only to deliver scripted disjunctions with unblinking certainty. There is no longer any need to fake a president. There is only the need to keep the feed running. So this is where the analysis leads. To mannerisms that repeat like a reel, to policies that contradict like competing scripts, to procedures that skip straight to the credits, and all of it points to the same rupture. The presidency no longer behaves like reality. It behaves like output. And once you see outputs without a traceable author, the mind performs a natural inversion. If the story makes no sense, perhaps the storyteller is gone. But that only raises the darker dilemma. Which world is actually worse for those of us who live under its shadow? Is it worse to discover that the president is a covert fabrication, an avatar stitched together from media and machine? Or is it worse that he is fully alive, fully present, and wielding executive power with no respect for limits? A synthetic presidency would be an epistemic catastrophe. Trust would collapse. Every speech, every photo, every policy announcement could be dismissed as forged. The liar's dividend would thrive. Even true evidence could be denied as false. Public life would fracture into suspicion and paranoia. Yet deception at that scale is fragile, isn't it? Sooner or later, leaks or forensic tools would unravel it, wouldn't they? Would anyone even believe the reveal? But a living, norm-breaking presidency is the slower disaster. It corrodes institutions deliberately, reshaping courts, laws, and agencies, until checks no longer function. It does not confuse reality, it rewrites it into legality. This is how democracies are captured, not by fakes, but by executives who make their will the new norm. Unlike a synthetic presidency, this one can last. So the harsher truth is that the second world, our world, is the greater danger. A deepfake would destabilize belief, but a real president eroding the rules destabilizes power itself. One destroys trust, the other destroys resistance. That means the task before ordinary people is double. Prepare primarily for the real threat. Organize through law, through state governments, through civil society, through elections. Assume the president is real and bent on norm destruction, but also guard against the informational threat. Build redundancy, preserve evidence, strengthen verification. Because even if he is real, the tools of simulation will be weaponized around him. So when the next announcement drops from nowhere, when one hand invites donors in with a gold card, while the other slams the door on skilled workers, when allies are armed and undermined in the same breath, don't only ask, "Is this real?" Ask, "Where is the record? Who acts on it? Who benefits?" Because the deeper question is not whether the president exists, it is whether his power can still be traced and held to account. So is he a deepfake? The satire is no longer satire. A presidency that produces absurdity without deliberation is already post-political. It does not matter if the absurdity is generated by AI or by impulse. The question isn't, is he real? The question is if democracy is still real.